shouldn't let myself off the hook either.
Yeah.
I'm Raymond, sometimes Ray, sometimes Raymond, either way. When I play the game Two Truths and a Lie, my three statements are, I've touched the Queen of England, I have been recruited by an NBA head coach to play basketball, and I've talked to Barack Obama on the phone. Two of those are true and one is a lie, to be revealed at the end of the evening. Clarence.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, on behalf of the Center for Spiritual Renewal, just a very warm welcome to all of you. The center's central mission is to help us to develop and nurture a deeper connections with God, or whatever name you use for God, the divine, in our lives. And also challenge us in terms of integrating our faith and the love we experience from God, as well as personal transformations and through our actions transforming the community around us as well. So tonight we are very pleased to have Deborah Garcia, all the way from Mexico, to join us, and also Ray Sawatsky. He is the co-founder of Kinvest and have done lots of work in not just thinking about the place of mutuality in service, but also put it into, both of them have really integrated mutuality into their practice and personal missions in transforming community wherever they are. I want to start it with just a little bit of a story. By the way, we are recording tonight's conversations. Does that bother anyone if we are doing that? If you are worried about it, you need to speak up now. Okay, thank you for your generosity. Back in 1968, someone called Ivan Illich, he was an Austrian Catholic priest, theologian, and social critic. He addressed a crowd of visiting young American college students spending the summer serving the poor of Latin America with his later well-known talk titled "To Hell with Good Intentions." In his address, he spoke boldly, unmasking the motivations and misunderstanding that had led these students to Mexico. In short, he told these students that they were unlikely to do any good in Latin America, that in fact, they were doing much harm by exporting American values and priorities to the people of a place they would never fully comprehend. He famously said, if you want to serve the poor, go do it in your own country where at least you understand the culture and the language when they tell you to go to hell. A little bit provoking, but "to hell with good intentions" pretty much describes why the center is creating space for the conversations tonight. How did the model of humble service, patterned after the example of Jesus washing his disciples' feet at the Last Supper, turn its head to disrespect, disempower, or worse, do harm, as in the case of the notorious Indian residential school system right here in Canada? to the recipients of Christian service. So, if you are troubled by what you heard so far, you have come to the right place. And thank you for coming. Being a center event, we always try to begin with a spiritual practice. And tonight, the spiritual practice is the welcome prayer. It is a way of centering ourselves in prayer modeled after Father Thomas Keating. So, I suddenly realized the clicker. I forgot my clicker. So first, try to relax. It's quite simple. There are only three steps for the welcome prayer. No, back. There you go. Thank you. So first, just feel and sink into what you experience this moment in your body. You may close your eyes if you like, or you may just find a point in the room to focus on if you don't like closing your eyes. Just feel and sink into what you experience this moment in your body. And now, in your heart, say the word welcome. Welcome what you're experiencing this moment in your body as an opportunity to consent to the divine indwelling. God is present. God is present right here, right now. By saying welcome, we consent to the indwellings of God's presence in us. And we welcome whatever feelings you are experiencing in your body right now. Whether it is discomfort, anxiousness, pain, nervousness. Finally, the first step is to let go by saying, I let go of my desire for security, affection, control, and embrace this moment as it is. there's another chance to practice that. I offer you this spiritual practice because I believe that this practice alone is essential for us to cultivate an environment and have the awareness of the different power dynamics in every situations and our own need to control, our own needs for affection, which often comes in the way of creating this space for mutual transformations. And I'm very happy to leave Ray and Deborah to guide us in the conversations later.
So the way we've structured the evening is it's a bit of a podcast setup. And if it goes really well, it might become a podcast. So pull up your chair to the podcast table, Deborah.
I know, right?
And before we begin, I just want to put a little bit of thought into the conversation before we begin. So first of all, Deborah and I are both practitioners in the space. And truthfully, we both carry traumas from working in the space. We both have been both the causers of harm, and we've seen other people harmed in international development and other kinds of spaces like that. So both of us speak with a lot of passion. We both have very strong opinions. Strong opinions can cause offense. But what we really want to create is a welcome tonight. If we say something tonight that doesn't quite resonate with you, we welcome pushback. We welcome conversation. We welcome refinement of thought. So I wanted to say that out of the gate. I also want to say that we both very much believe that words have meaning. The things we say are founded in meaning. And therefore, the ideas that flow from those words have consequences. So when we talk about ideas, we're not talking about something that's ethereal or just out there. We're talking about things that when they hit the ground actually have consequences. And that's important. Mm-hmm. The last thing before I jump into the definitions is we're going to have 3 large topics tonight. And within each of the 3 large topics, we're going to invite conversation with you. So as we go, we will end each section with an audience dialogue, a back and forth. And again, before I introduce Deborah, I'm going to just define 2 terms for us, because 2 terms will come up a lot tonight: charity and mutuality. And just from our distinction on this, charity is the idea that comes from a giving from surplus towards need. Charity is mostly one-directional. It is the giver providing aid to the recipient. Those 2 parties are not equal. By the way, one of those people have to go to glasses at some point to be able to read my own little screen. Often the motivation behind charity, and this isn't necessarily negative, is compassion or a moral duty, or even the idea of generosity undergirds this idea of charity. But what happens is the giver quite often retains the power in the relationship. The recipient is positioned as dependent and therefore needs to be grateful. And I think both of us have seen so much expectation of gratitude from giving. Charity tends to focus on alleviating an immediate need. It often doesn't inherently change the relationships, the systems, or the power structures in which it's given. There's always this idea of the helper and the helped. Mutuality, on the other hand, which is not a term that's often used in our common vocabulary around this, is that idea of co-creating shared value. It's the idea that mutuality is both relational and reciprocal. Both parties contribute, both parties benefit. It's grounded in the idea that human flourishing is necessarily interdependent. Your well-being is connected to mine. The relationship is horizontal rather than vertical. It's built on dignity, shared purpose, co-ownership. Mutuality aims for something that's much longer term, a sustained transformation. It's not just relief, it's about creating something that lasts. And lastly, it emphasizes shared risk, shared responsibility, and shared reward. And so I just want to make sure the 2 terms were out there. And I just want to turn to Deborah. This is Dr. Deborah Garcia. And I want to start by exploring the title you hold at Eternal Anchor.
That's right.
So ChatGPT, I looked you up. I had chat search the internet broad and wide for your profile, and I discovered that you are the Director of Equity and Justice for Eternal Anchor. Those are big words. Can you just start there and give us a little bit of your story, how you go from your beginnings to the Director of Equity and Justice?
Yeah, so Dr. Garcia, when I was very young, I've grown up in a Christian setting in an organization that housed over 200 both nationals and American and Canadians living in this compound doing the Lord's work, right? And I grew up from a family that had never had any education beyond elementary school. So I'm the first person in my family to get to go to university. And the reason why I wanted to be a lawyer had always had to do with injustice. When I was a baby, my parents separated before I was a year old, and my father, have you guys heard of the federales? They're like it was like the police in Mexico that's known for the most corruption. And the reason why my mom left him was because he was selling drugs. So he had money, and my mom wanted him to pay for child support, and he wasn't. So she saved her money to pay a lawyer, and when she hired this lawyer to sue him for child support, the lawyer just left with the money. And she told me, we are not going to have enough for the next couple of months because I gave all of our savings, and basically that meant we were only going to eat what they served at this place where we lived, because we lived in this place that gave us free housing and free breakfast, lunch, and dinner as long as she worked for them. And they also gave us clothes. So we really should have been so grateful for everything that they gave us, right? And I just remember being so angry because this lawyer had taken advantage of my mother, who had no money and who had given him everything she had. And I said, one day I'm going to be a lawyer and I'm going to be one of the good kind. So I was 8. And since then I was just convinced that I was going to be a lawyer. I was never good at math. When I was in high school, I went to high school in Linden Christian, and they told me I needed to have a backup plan because I was getting C- in math, and that there was no way I would be passing university exams to go to law school. But I was still like, no, I'm gonna be a lawyer. And so after high school, went to law school, graduated, and when we started Eternal Anchor, I thought that I was giving up my law degree to do work with people with disabilities. I didn't think we could fuse those. About 5 years ago, I went back and got my master's degree in family law and became passionate about adoption in Mexico, because I realized kids in Mexico are not being adopted. And we're the 3rd largest country with most abandonment in all of Latin America. Something needs to change, and I've always believed that you have to be a part of the change you want to see in the world. You can't just think this needs to happen. So when I graduated my master's program, I transitioned from being a home director to being equity and justice director. And basically it's a made-up title for me within the organization that gives me the ability to not just think about, let's go to universities and classrooms and talk about inclusion and what is disability rights and what are human rights, but it also allows me to do a lot of, I think in Canada you call it lobbying, when you speak with government. So I'm one of the chairs in a committee for child protective services in the state of Baja, and I get to lobby on what do the homes that have the children in abandonment look like? What should they look like? What are the steps we're taking to deinstitutionalization? And my other part of that is lobbying for labor rights for people with disabilities.
Amazing.
Yeah, so that's what I'm doing.
And actually, just on that last point, Mexico has an interesting law around labor rights for people with disabilities in terms of a percentage of workforce if you're a business
Yes.
owner. Can you just
Yeah.
get us off topic right away?
I know, right?
Right into tangents.
3%.
Yeah.
All business owners, and labor law in Mexico is federal, so it applies for the whole country. And 3% of the workforce of a company has to be reserved for people with disabilities. But if nobody's applying, that's the excuse you're using. No one's applying with a disability. They can't meet the requirements because they can say these are the requirements. So that's where we are trying to do something alongside people with disability that are saying, well, I think I can do that, but I need help to get there.
Before we jump off into the...
Yes.
So give us the elevator pitch on Eternal Anchor so we can contextualize your experience a little bit.
Okay, Eternal Anchor is in Baja, Mexico. Baja is on the peninsula of Mexico, 5 hours down from San Diego. It's fairly rural, very agricultural work. So lots of strawberry, raspberry, blueberry, cucumber, and bell pepper picking. Those are the majority of the works that are offered in our community. And up until a few years ago, I would say 5, there was no government support or funding for programs for people with disabilities. So Eternal Anchor has been focused on working with families that have children and adults with disabilities and providing the services alongside the families so that they have access to being a part of the community and to have a life with dignity.
Good. First big topic, going back to the difference between charity and mutuality and this idea of the giver and recipient.
Yes.
You and I have had a little bit of chance to prepare, so this question is a little bit loaded. I've spent most of my career raising money, and sometimes I got to feel a bit like Robin Hood in that role, and stealing from the rich to give to the poor. But I never sat on the other side of the table. What was it like to be a recipient of that, and how did that make you feel?
I would say that when you are in the recipient side and you never leave your community, you don't realize that you're the recipient. I clearly remember when I was young, I grew up with American and Canadian kids, and I didn't think I was less than the American and Canadian kids that I played with, and I didn't think that the kids that were in the orphanage that played with us were any different. But I clearly remember my mom telling me, because I don't know what comment I made. When you're little, you make comments. And my mom told me, no, Deborah, you're poor. We are poor. And I said, no, I'm not. You're poor. And I just didn't think of myself as poor because as a child, my concept of poverty, and it's still this, poverty is this idea that you are helpless to give yourself a good life. Like you are not enough. Even as a child, I understood that poverty meant that I was less than. And I felt that I wasn't. And to this day, I still believe that there can be people with a lot of financial stability and have a poverty mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So you and I have spent some time in preparation talking about missions trips.
Yes.
And the idea of the go and change the world, love on people, all that language we use. Tell us a little bit about your experience being the child in the place, in the mission space where the people came from abroad to love on you.
To love on me. I have so many stories. I realize as an adult, sometimes when you see your trauma, you see it came from little things that happen as you're a child. So I'm a bit of a clothing hoarder.
Oh, interesting.
I have over 100 pairs of shoes. I could only bring 3 on this trip. I was very conflicting because I feel like it's not matching. But so sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm materialistic. But I grew up at this place. I grew up in marathon shirts because that's what people donate. You know, and the marathon shirts were usually like yellow or like white with neon words. And I remember being in 6th grade and wearing these Nikes that were 4 sizes too big. And people, like my classmates, were like, those shoes don't fit you. And I'm like, yeah, they do. Because you go to this clothing room and you pick, we were given, like, you can pick 3 shirts, 2 pants, 5 underwear, 5 socks. And you only get to come every 6 months. And if something didn't fit you, you pick the next best thing.
Yeah.
So I think of like that. Now as an adult, I love a good sale, right? Like when it's like 50% off at this store that is already cheap that I like, I'll be like, okay, I need like 20 things. And it's feeding my inner child who felt like I didn't get enough. And I remember having been chosen at BVS. You know that summer programs, the white vans would come into our town and they would set up at the local church. And from Monday through Friday, from 10 to, I don't know, 2 p.m. or something, they would put on a puppet show and in English. And then, you know, like a puppet show, and then you make the bracelet. Same bracelet. I don't remember what the colors stand for, but I made it every single time. And because I grew up bilingual, growing up with so many American and Canadian kids, I was always the favorite because I was this little brown kid that spoke perfect English. And I would get toted around by this woman. I clearly remember being taken in, and then they'd ask permission. Can we take her to tacos? Can we take her to a restaurant? And they would buy me a pair of shoes and put a big bow. You know, it was the era of the big bows on the head and the ruffly dress that was in the 90s. And then on Fridays, she would leave, you know, because Friday was the last day. One year she gave me a photo, and I clearly remember at one point of my life wishing she was my mom. Because she just seemed like she came in and it was, she treated me, now that I see it, it was love bombing. You know, love bombing this little child, treating me to things my mom couldn't buy me, and wishing I had that. And one time, I didn't tell you this, but one time this person helped my mom pay for a ticket to go to Chicago.
Wow.
So I went to Chicago when I was 12 years old. They took me to Payless Shoes, got me some shoes. I remember, and I used to think, Payless Shoes, man, those are some good shoes. You know, like, I was so excited. I went to Payless Shoes, and they bought me this blue inner tube. And I spent the weekend at her house before she got married. Her name was Angela. They were Italian Chicago people. And it always made me wish I had been born elsewhere. And it really played into this whole why. What did we do? What did I do that I had to be born to less? That I had to be born into having to struggle for what I have.
Did you ever explore with your mother what it made her feel?
The few times
with your mother, what it made her mother feel?
I think the few times we talked about it, for example, when I came back from high school and I cried all the way home because I was leaving America, which is funny because now she's an American citizen. But back then she wasn't. And she told me to shut up. And and I didn't get it. I thought that she was just being so unfair to me. But it was because she couldn't give me what I was mourning. You know, she went and picked me up in this home in Linden. I lived it had 7 bedrooms, and I was the only child there living with my host family. And I had this like rich, privileged Linden life. And then I went back to no running water. And I remember crying on the bus, and my mom was like, "Can you just shut up? You have it so good. You have it so good. I wish I had the life you had." And she just felt like garbage because she couldn't give me what I wanted.
Let's dive a little bit deeper into the relationship you have with Angela.
Yes.
I told you we were going to be controversial tonight. At what point do you think it bordered on child abuse?
Oh, now that I think about it, all of it was wrong. I have children now, and now that I think, like, would I let my kid go stay with this woman that I don't have a relationship with? What if she didn't know? And to expose a child to an emotional connection to a person who isn't going to stay in their life, I now understand why I have attachment issues. Because growing up, every summer, I can name and picture the people that would come into my life and just like sweep me up for a week, wine and dine me, and then drop me on Friday night.
And then one year, they simply don't show up.
And then they stop coming.
Yeah.
Or worse. I empowered myself and thought myself an equal to the people that were giving to me. And how dare I? Because I was ungrateful.
You're not grateful enough.
I wasn't grateful enough.
Yeah. I remember I'm on the other side of this equation, led many a mission trip with young people in my life. And I remember the first time Mutuality caught me off guard. I didn't have language for it then. But we took a group of high school students from Langley, British Columbia to Nicaragua. And we thought we were doing great things because we were building playgrounds. By the way, locally sourced playgrounds. Step at least in the right direction. Locally sourced playgrounds. So we didn't ship a playground from Canada. We actually bought it in Nicaragua. In fact, we had a welder basically create it from his own mind. Some of it worked really well, some of it didn't. But we were installing this playground in the school in a little town called Leon. And so here it is, my group of 15 middle-class kids from Langley trying to figure out how to dig holes to put concrete in and build a playground. And there was a person, younger man, standing at sort of the fence of the school. He was watching us for a while. And some of the girls on my group said, "Mr. Sawatsky, we're getting a little creeped out here. I think, this feels really bad." So I told our interpreter, I said, "Go over and just find out what's going on and kind of get rid of him." Our interpreter's name was Mary, who walked over and he engaged this young man, and the man sort of hung his head and walked down the street. And Mario came back and I said, "So what was his deal?" And he goes, "Oh, he just wanted a job." I said, "Okay, what would it cost me to hire him for a day?" And he said, $5. I said, "Go get him." And I had this young man on the trip who was very arrogant, very cocky. He was one of the people that God blessed with great looks and, everything. His name was Colton. And I said, "Colton, you and him are going to work together for the day." And I watched cross-cultural friendship emerge for the first time, organically. I'd never seen it before. And I remember thinking, okay, I have to do these trips differently. So using that as a lead into my next question, in addition to the sort of imbalance that took place in personal relationships, what did you take away from watching mission groups come to the place where you lived and do good work there? the kinds of things they did, and then after they left, what happened. Like, just sort of lean into that sustainable, unsustainable conversation a little bit.
I mean, I feel that the reason why we've done Eternal Anchor different it is because I've seen so many ways of how not to do it and why not to do it. I think of, for example, when I came to Canada and I lived in the Canadian Reserve. And I came, they didn't tell me, they just told me, do you want to go hang out with Canadian people that live at a res? And I'm like, sure. But when I came, I realized it was a training program. The organization's called Native American Indigenous Ministries, and they would take you to live at a reserve for 2 months to see if you were cut out for mission work. And I was like, oh, I didn't know I was signing up to see if, because I've never considered myself a missionary. That didn't sound right with what I wanted to do with my life. And what I realized about missions is, why am I in Canada living at a res? I'm not Canadian. I don't understand I didn't even know about the residential schools, the trauma, the disconnect between the church and Native people and how hurt they are. And I thought, I need to stay in my own country, like what that book says. You know, like be in your own community, build your community along with your community. And that's why I wanted to stay, because I had seen my community be used as a poster of pity.
So I want to jump on that. So fundraising.
Yes.
This is where my traumas emerge. I've been a fundraiser in the charitable sector for 20 plus years. Not always proud of what I've done. Talk a little bit about how we use story of poverty, and in particular how we use children who we perceive to be in stories of poverty for fundraising.
Yeah, so and we've all done it. I want to say that when I say we, I have seen how I've done it. How Eternal Anchor went, for example, sponsorship programs. You know, we were a part of this sponsor a child and give $25, and with your $25, he will go to school. But the reality is, it takes like 10 people at $25 to actually fund what it takes to raise
Companies have to
money.
write 10 thank you letters?
And they have to do 10 thank you letters. And then but then the people have this idea that I am giving them education, right? Because we're saying, poor little Juanito, if it wasn't for your $25, he would be uneducated. And the other part of it is the cheapening. It's cheapening his education. Something that to this day really and I wonder if some of this is my pride. I'm sure some of this is my pride. But when I hear that I did my PhD in Mexico, and it's like, oh, but it's a Mexican PhD, right? Like, oh, your PhD is down here. I went to this American school or this European school that makes me better. We were just talking about this. This idea that where you go to school makes you better, but these funding with children, unfortunately, pity sells. And the image of this poor child with no shoes when they're dirty.
It's poverty pornography.
Poverty pornography gets money, and so many, when we talk about charity, I think charity tends to use this guilt of, if you are guilty if you don't save this person, but it also, this idea that you are the answer, that we are the answer for this person. And it completely takes away the dignity of the families that are trying to provide education for their children, right? And I just want to say on this, for me, it's the house builds. Mexico is riddled with
house builds.
And to me, I just don't believe in coming to my country to build a home you would never live in. You know, they are okay bringing high schoolers that don't have no business doing construction, building these wooden structures that have no way for electricity, running water, an outhouse, instead of paying local builders. Like if you really, your whole thing is like dignity living, well then what does a dignified home look like? They should pay for it. How do we do that? We
How
should
do we
just
create
gift
mutuality?
It. Yes.
Yes, interesting.
Are they ready to live in it themselves?
Exactly.
Exactly, yeah. One last question in this section, and I'll frame it with a story. This story might offend, so I'm going to delicately deal with it. I remember being at a Christian concert with Ginny a number of years ago when Maddie was very young. And at this Christian concert, halfway through, just before the intermission, the band stopped and said, "We're going to give you an opportunity to change the world." And at the end of every row in this concert, people handed out this string of pictures of children came down the rows. If I turned it over, I could, for $35 a month, change their life. There's this picture of this kid staring back at me in my hand. I thought, would I ever be okay as a father to allow my daughter's image, Maddie's picture, to be circulated in another country for the purpose of stimulating donations? Now, you've been on the other side of that. Again, that's how we started this conversation. How do we address this problem? How do we help people understand that the way we fundraise actually contributes to the de-dignification? I'm not sure that's a word. I'm going to make it a word. The stealing of somebody's dignity. How do we help people think about that problem?
That's a great question. I think that to even start, we have to understand the difference between charity and mutuality, right? Like, what is this organization? What is it doing? How is it doing it? To start. For example, for me, I still consistently see that because I've been raised in a model of charity, that was what was given to me. And in a way, the privilege that I have in my own community came from charity work. But how that impacts my life now, to switch it, it creates a lot of friction with people that still believe that's the right model.
I want to pause here. The title of this first section was The Giver and the Recipient. And I think you've had the giver and the recipient. And so if you haven't figured it out yet, Deborah and I are deconstructing a little bit right now. Was it obvious, maybe?
Was it?
I don't know. I want to invite conversation. React to this. Have you been bothered by anything we've said? Is there anything that stood out for you that you want to ask further questions about? I want to open it up for dialogue now. I often say when I talk to people about this, and with Kinvest, the organization I lead, we're not a charity, we're a business. So we're actually trying to do good in the world by creating business in another country, in Rwanda to be specific. And I often say I'm not against charity. And in fact, coming from my Christian background, generosity is how God funds the kingdom, to use old language. So I don't want to get in the way of God's work. But at the same time, I think a lot of what charity does isn't God's work. And so that's where I want to sort of come into the conversation. It's not an either or, it's about an evaluation. And you and I talked a little bit about, you just said it actually, evaluating what's actually happening. And then trying to think through it and go, am I actually in a position where I'm in a position of power in this relationship? And then what can I do about that, I think, is a starting point. You want to add anything to that?
No.
No. Other thoughts? Questions?
So I want to also reiterate kind of what you were saying. And even at Eternal Anchor yesterday, we had a fundraiser, and someone said, I can clearly hear you say that you don't need us, but you welcome us. And when I say you don't need us, I mean, and for me, what I have seen is I clearly believe that nationals need to champion. They need to be the ones. We know what our community needs because I live there and because I live the consequences. You know, and when we are doing, for example, our education programs, we ask the families to pay $150 US a month for their child to be a part of the education program. But some families cannot afford $150. So we do a socioeconomic evaluation. How much can they give and still give them the ability to pay for the rest of their needs? And then we find community collaborators that help pay for the education of a child. So there is still a need for US and Canadian support in countries of development. It's how it's being done. It's what are they doing with the money that you are sending? How are they asking you for money? Have you been asked in a way where there is this idea that you are saving someone? Or are you in a partnership? Is this mutual? For example, I grew up in my community where we had so many American and Canadian people come, and genuinely this idea, where, like when we started Eternal Anchor, a Mexican told me, you're gonna fail because you don't know. Because I wasn't American or Canadian, and none of the other organizations that did nonprofit work were ever started by Mexicans.
Always expats. Always foreigners.
Always
foreigners.
Imported leadership.
Yeah.
So this idea that I can't help myself. So this is why it doesn't mean that it's wrong. We need each other. Mutuality is we need each other. India still needs support, but how are we? It's evaluating how are we doing this? Is there dignity? In
I want to jump in and come back to the journey that many of you are on. I think you represent the journey for lots of. We've been doing good work all our life, haven't we? And giving to good things all our life, haven't we? I went on this journey from inside the charity space. So until 2020, I was head of a charity that did over 300 water wells a year in 4 African countries. I'm doing good in the world, right? Bringing clean water to villages. I then had to confront my own space with this and go, am I always doing good work when we bring water to a village? And the answer isn't always yes. And the crisis of identity for me took place quite harshly. I've spent my whole career in the charitable sector. I'm one of those people who, I don't say this in very many on it, but I've raised millions of dollars for the charitable sector. And how much of it is done good? And not being able to necessarily answer that question with clarity. And the journey for me started when one of our donors who'd given dozens of water wells, the funding for dozens of wells, looked me in the eye and said, can you just tell me about one of the villages? Just tell me about one where you've put a water well in my name. And I sat across the table from him at a coffee shop in Abbotsford, and I went, Ben, I can't. And he says, you know what I think you're doing? I think you're doing hit and run charity. And I have to tell you, I went, oh shit. What am I doing? Hit and run charity. Like, those words hit me with a kind of harshness that I couldn't tell him about the people. I couldn't name a single person where a water well had been put in, right? I didn't know sufficiently because I actually was leading a charity that was doing really good work in the world, but it wasn't stopping to say, can we just sit with you for a little while in your village and learn about you? Because our goal was, we got to get to 1 water well a day. That was my goal for our mission, our organization. We were at 300 in 2019. I was like, we're just 65 water wells away from 1 a day. That wasn't the right goal. The right goal was to say, let's go a little deeper and get to know the people. Right? And so my encouragement to you is, you're doing good things in the world. The deeper question is, how can you become part of a reciprocal relationship with that? How do you get involved more deeply, not less deeply, actually, is what I want to encourage. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep.
So, yeah, yeah, yeah. So, yeah. Yeah. So you've given me a really great segue into our next section. Thank you. So I've actually titled our next section. Oh, there a question here? Sorry, did I miss somebody?
No, it's fine. I was just going to make a comment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I just know that Noreen is one of the people that stands at the door and talks to people that
Yeah.
come.
Sure. Yeah.
And she finds out about the guy.
Mhm.
And she takes it like that.
Yeah.
So, balance that out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
yes, absolutely.
So it's our next section. I've titled "The Language We Use to Describe What We Do," because the language we use to describe what we do is part of the answer to your question. And I'm going to just go to a Bible verse for a second, because this is the Center for Spiritual Renewal, right? One of the Bible verses we misquote a lot is James 1:27, and we always say we're supposed to feed widows and orphans. James 1:27. The way most of us carry that verse in our mind is to feed widows and orphans. It doesn't actually say that. It actually says, I need my glasses, sadly. The religion that our God our Father accepts as pure and faultless in the ESV says to visit widows and orphans in their distress and keep oneself from being polluted by the world. It's a call to mutuality. And the Greek word for visit is actually to look after, but it doesn't mean aid. It means entering their situation with care. It means forming relationship with. The widows and orphans don't want food. They want to be in relationship. Right? Community. And I shouldn't say the widows and orphans, even the language. You should call me out of the language I use. It's like saying the poor. It's this idea that because they're a widow, and in the biblical times, they've been actually dislocated from their community because, unfortunately, so much of their community was through a husband, right? In terms of how the society was structured. They've been actually dislocated. And what James is calling us towards is a restoration of them into community that requires us to visit and be present and form community with them. Actually, the idea in the verse is a household of belonging, which I think is a really interesting way of thinking of it. And it's reciprocal. There's a benefit to the giver in this case, right? There's a flourishing that takes place when we're faithful. All of that is to say that to say I'm going to feed widows and orphans is to use that charity recipient giver piece, but to go and visit. To your point, visiting is still valuable. I agree. I think it's important. And so, Deborah.
I was going to just say, with what you're saying, when you're talking about community, something that for me, I'm like, community means you aren't always the giver.
That's correct. Yeah.
It's, you have to be both the giver and the receiver, right? And it doesn't allow you to genuinely live in community. Means you have to be vulnerable and uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's the purpose, I think, of often doing some of these things.
Yes. Please do.
Because sometimes what we're receiving is our own sense of and so we're feeling really good that we help somebody out because we don't have their problem. I do this all. Oh, I feel really good after you talk to somebody and feeling like I've really been there with them. But it's my own ego that's better and it's so it's a challenge to that. It's not saying it's wrong or that it's not true.
So let's jump off into language.
Yes.
One of the favorite things missions teams like to say is we're going to go down to Mexico and we're going to love on the people down there.
Love on the kids.
How do you feel about being loved on?
Let's go back, that power imbalance, right? Loved on.
Yeah.
Or one of my other ones, I get to debrief a lot with youth that come down, and the idea of they tell me they feel connected to a child when the child lit up when I walked in the door because he recognized me. And it's these ideas that I formed a connection, but the connection is always low to high.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the inability, for example, when some of these people invite them, we come over to our house, this idea that they have to bring a gift. And Mexican hospitality is, don't bring anything, it's my treat.
Right. Is it almost an offense to bring a gift?
Yeah, because next time I'm going to your house and I'm bringing nothing.
Oh, I see. I was actually really
That's
offended
like,
you didn't bring anything to my house when you came to.
Oh no, it's your treat. Yeah, that's when I say I invite you, I'm taking it. But then we say next time I'm coming to you, and you're gonna do it too. I'm not even asking you. It's just reciprocal.
So in terms of things that people have said to you in this context, What is the most offensive thing that somebody has said to you with a good intention? And again, that second part of the question is the important one. The most offensive thing somebody has said to you with a good intention.
Ooh.
I didn't prep you for that one.
You didn't prep me for that one. Top 5. There you go. Yes, there's multiple. One of them was, I was asking another nonprofit director who works in Uganda. And I've always I've never been to that side of the world, and talking about going to other parts of the world, for me, I would love to I would like to know what the world is like over there. So I'm like, I would love to know what it would take to go with you. And he laughed at me and he said, oh, you could never afford it. And he walked away.
Wow.
And that was hurtful, and I don't know if that was with good intentions, but
it might not have been. Yeah.
Another really hurtful thing is that for me has been, for example, Deborah, why don't you tell this group, this is something that has happened to me many times, about how you used to live in college. Show them where you lived, because they'll be so shocked, and it'd be so good for them to see how far you've come.
How far you've come.
How far you've come.
Wow. Yeah. Whew, I'm just processing that, actually. I'll try to throw my own story in the middle of this, too, because I have worked with a lot of people who had good intentions. And I think a lot of people who have given of their resources have good intentions.
Yes.
I remember the first time we went to Nicaragua, and we worked in a community called La Chureca. La Chureca was the dump community. And these were people who were so outcast from society that they lived and tried to sustain their life off of what was delivered to the dump in Nicaragua. And most of the time, La Churecans, they were actually had it labeled. They couldn't leave. And there was this amazing pastor who has the same name as me, Ramon, who formed a church just outside the gates of La Chureca called the Lighthouse Church. And he and his wife, Miriam, they walked in La Chureca. And La Chureca was a horrible place. I spent too many days of my life there, and that's not that many, to be honest. And they lived amongst these people and just served them every day in the truest spirit of Christian servanthood, right? And one day, the denomination of Pastor Ramon's church had a preacher come from the U.S. to preach, and Ramon had to give his pulpit up. And this pastor talked about all the good that he would bring to this community, and all the resources he would bring to this community. And as he walked out, he wouldn't even shake their hands. He walked out to his entourage of beautiful vehicles outside and drove away. And I confronted him just as he was leaving. I was like, you need to stop and actually talk to Pastor Ramon. Because he said he's just the Nicaraguan pastor. And I thought to myself, how dare you? He's the pastor.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, because he walks the life every day. Right. The language we use. Do we risk offending the people we serve by how we talk about them? And now, even my language was bad. I was waiting for you to correct me. Because, so even that framing of that question is a poorly framed question. Do we risk offending people when we say we come to serve them? Because servanthood is a Christian principle.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that risk?
Well, and the word serving has become, because of a lot of the high to low, become a loaded word that's, at least where I live, tried to not use it.
Okay, what do you use in place of it? Let's help us transition to.
So in Mexico and in our community, we use the word to work in solidarity. We say that we are solidarios.
Is that actually a noun to describe me?
Oh, I don't know about grammar. Don't ask me about grammar. but to be, Henry Nouwen talked about like building a home where suffering is most acute, so for us, we don't use the word serving just because they call Baja the Haiti of Mexico, and people associate. In fact, we've been told, "You're Christian. Why do you make us pay for the education program? This should be free." And this idea that serving, and that's why unpacking that means you do for me.
So how do we get from there to a mutuality? And our last section, by the way, is if we've deconstructed for a while, we're going to try to reconstruct in our last section. We haven't opened to audience yet, but just sort of foreshadowing, how do we go from that servanthood is actually an imbalance to a mutuality of shared space?
Well, I would think it's simple.
Oh, okay.
Well, because we can't have the answer.
Interesting.
Right? Like
that's the mystery.
Or at least for us, what it has been is what, at first it was, what does the community need? That's what it was for me, because I was not born with a disability, and I did not have children. So what does the community need? But now as I've become a mother to 2 boys with disabilities, I no longer think of it, what does the community need? I think of it as I'm building the community that my children deserve.
That's beautiful.
So the world that I want my children to thrive in, not just live in, but to thrive in. That's for me. But I can't speak on everyone because I'm not there yet.
Yeah. So we'll open up, right after I make this statement, we'll open up to the group. The first realization for me when I shifted from charity to building a business that would create jobs in rural Africa is we did it during COVID. And so we actually couldn't go to the farms where we were creating jobs. We had people in Rwanda taking care of things, which actually was a really good discipline because I couldn't be the savior in that model. Had to do things by Zoom. But we went to this little farm that we had started, which was 11 hectares at the time. We now have 600 hectares. So we've gone through a bit of a growth. But this little farm had 30 or 40 workers on it. And it was just being developed. And we went to visit. And this one gentleman stood up and he says, "I want to thank you for your business." Now, I've been part of thank you ceremonies for charity far too many times in my life. I thought, you want to thank me for my business, my company? That's a weird thing to say out loud. And I said, can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that? And he says, well, we've been working here for a few months. We've been clearing the land, and we know that you haven't made any money yet because there's not been a crop here yet. But you pay us every Friday. And that's honorable. And I remember thinking that none of that was particularly heroic. They did a job, we had a business, we paid them on time. Right? And for me, that was a kind of realization that there was something else going on. And another gentleman stood up and he said, I want to tell you about my first week of work here. And we said, okay. And he said, so I didn't believe you that you would pay me because that's what happens here, right? So I worked every day and I asked your farm, we have this amazing farm manager, her name is Aline. She's just an incredible human. And so I asked Aline every day, are you going to pay me with cash money at the end of the week? And she promised me she would pay me with cash money at the end of the week. And so Friday came and I thought, no way, not going to happen. And sure enough, at the end of the day, she gathered us around her little desk and took out her money and she wrote down in her book and paid each one of us. And he said, I started to cry. And by the way, Rwandans are a very stoic people group, especially since the genocide. They don't show their emotion. They're very reserved. I started to cry. And Aline asked me what was going on for me. And he said, well, these particular jeans, these pants that I'm wearing, they've never had that much money in it before. And she asked me what I was going to do with it. And he said, I'm going to walk up to the village. I'm going to find a place to have a drink. And I'm going to buy a drink. And I'm going to sit down. I'm going to drink it like a real person. And his framing of that statement across the translation cemented this idea that when you're not a recipient of charity, there's a dignity that takes place.
Yep.
And that's the starting point for mutuality. But before we jump to mutuality, this section was called the language we use. So the language we use, is there comments or questions about that you want to dive in a little deeper with?
Earlier today, when we were talking about this, I was telling you about how, like for us, something that's really important, and I used the language wrong, and I said it's that, I think I said that we empower people, and you told me you had a conflict with that, and I hadn't, we are so used to using certain language, and in my mind, I'm like, that is good. And when we started to hash it out,
I don't like the word empower.
So we started talking about that, and I'm like, well, I believe in empowerment, but then we started to talk about how that's phrased and how, because of how it happens, I am not empowering that person. The person empowered themselves.
Right. I think that's a great use of the concept of language. If I say, Deborah, let me come to Eternal Anchor, and I want to empower you to be a better leader.
Right.
I'm connotating a whole bunch of things in that statement, right?
Yes.
But if you use it in the context of I was empowered
Yes.
to do this or whatever it is, then there's no imbalance that takes place. And so I think that, again, that's an example of our language will often show us where we're coming to a relationship with. And there's an intentionality that needs to take place there. Again, words have meaning, ideas have consequences. I'm noticing the time.
Yes.
Let's begin the reconstruction. Mutuality. When did you first sort of stumble upon this idea? And then tell me how you started to put it into practice at Eternal Anchor.
Mutuality?
Yeah.
It was immediate when families, so we started it because we saw a need and we found a way to meet the need.
You're really emphasizing the we here.
So the reason why I say that is because it's been 11 years and I was telling Jenny, if I could go back and if I was faced in the same circumstances, I wouldn't have approached it in the way I would now. Because I have, we started Eternal Anchor because a boy needed a home. Because dad was not able. And it's this, Dad was not able, right? So now I really don't believe that that was the best thing we could have done. Have good things happen after that? Yes. But I wouldn't do it now. I would never now be like, let's take a child away from their home because Dad can't.
Right.
Because that means I'm taking I am not allowing that family to thrive. I am not coming alongside, I'm fixing it. We saved that child, right?
Yeah.
So I would not do that. But when families came to us and said, we don't want what you will have, this is what we want. And we said, hey, we have the time. We have these many hours. We will do this with you. From the very beginning, that was mutuality. It wasn't, I'm going to save these children. It was family saying, this is what we need and we would love. Nobody is willing to do it.
Yeah. Them telling you what they need is so important. And that's
hearing them.
It's an aspect of dignity.
Yes.
Yeah. I have to share a story that's not my story to share fully, but I was engaging with somebody. We were talking about the food bank a few years ago. Sorry, that's not true. We were talking about Christmas hampers, which the food bank was facilitating. Many years ago, this conversation took place. And this person was somebody who every year he and his family gave a hamper to a needy family. That was the language that was used. And before sort of protectionist issues came in, you would actually go visit the family you were giving the hamper to. You would knock on the door and go, look, I'm giving you this Christmas hamper. And you would get a list of the names. You're dying, aren't you? You would get a list of this is how many children they have and what ages they are, and you would go to the store and you buy presents. And he said, I did this for 2 or 3 years, and I always noticed that even though there was a father listed on the list of what the family was, the father never was at the door. So I finally asked, he says, what I discovered is that the father was so embarrassed that he couldn't give his own children gifts, that he couldn't actually show up in that moment to be present for the hamper transfer. And so I said, well, now what do you do? He says, you know what I did? I contacted that father and I said, you know what I'd like to do with you? I'd like to go shopping with you so that we together can go shopping and you can buy the gifts for your children that you want to give them. And I got out of the way because the lack of dignity in that for the father was so profound. I think you're saying a little bit of the same thing. That I know, by the way, the story I told isn't necessarily a mutuality story, but it's to the idea of dignity at the center of what you're doing. And so
in the relationship too, I think is important. Somebody, it may not be, you do need funding, right? And it needs to come from somewhere. But if it's being done without relationship, the dignity aspect can't be there.
So how do you build funding models that are relational and reciprocal, where both parties benefit? How do you build programs that involve broader communities coming together?
I believe there has to, one, you listen. What does the community need? What is the community willing to do about it?
Right.
How many of them are signing up? And what are the ways that I can partner with them? I think that's key.
That's the starting point.
To start, yes.
Do you have a really good example of where this is your champion story of mutuality?
I think, I wasn't prepared for that one, but I think it's people, right?
Okay.
Like, for example, a story, the woman who works with our adult services, it's just one woman, and she used to work for another nonprofit. And when she worked at another nonprofit, talking about the different ways to do mission work. This other nonprofit in our same community, genuinely, we are called the Haiti of Mexico. This idea that you try to do so much with so little, right? So they were paid below minimum wage, which is illegal. But when you do it under the name of God, it's, we can't give you more. This is what the people have sent, And we hope you understand because the person that's being employed is also a Christian and they're also doing it because they want to do good, right? So this idea, she was a single mother of two, barely making it with what she was given, and then donations were bad. And they said, cut so many employees, right? And she just showed up to work one day and they told her tomorrow is your last day because tomorrow's payday. And just then her world is just upside down because you live paycheck to paycheck, and she did child evangelism was her job. She went into the communities, did a Bible story, and when she came to work at Eternal Anchor, she was coming out of survival and it was in her mind, because she had never been allowed to go to school, she told me, I genuinely thought I wasn't allowed to dream, that was for other people. And at Eternal Anchor, she had to be in charge of like 15 students and eventually graduated her class. And we just saw this woman's like a dreamer. You give her something and she's thinking of how to make it bigger. So we thought we need somebody for the adults that is brave. So we gave it to Tere. And Tere literally like 3 months ago told me, I just want you to know, I've never told you this, but since I've come to Eternal Anchor, after having training, I realized I can learn. So she didn't tell us, we didn't pay for it, but she went and finished her high school degree. She started building her home with the salary she's earning, which is above minimum wage, and she doesn't have a university degree. And she's enrolling in university in January because she believes not only that she gets to dream, but she told me, I want to be a role model for my children because growing up, my parents were told they could never dream for anything, and that was what they passed on to me. And I want my kids to see they can reach for the stars. So to me, Mutuality, that has so much to do with it because she is doing something that most people can't do, which is manage 17 adults with disabilities by herself and coming up with ways to engage in the community and be out there. So she is doing incredible things, and at the same time, she is empowering herself as she is pouring into all these lives.
The economics of Mutuality.
Yes.
Because the economics is the hard part. How do we create economic relationships that are actually live in this sense of both parties benefiting? How do you think is the best way to get there?
Of both parties benefiting?
Yeah.
I think it's vulnerability. But I don't know, what do you think?
So I've had the privilege of meeting a Swiss scholar named Bruno Roche, who wrote the book called The Economics of Mutuality. And he thinks that we need to create economic relationships where, as he would say, you need to identify where the imbalance exists in the relationship, and you need to be prepared to lay it down. And so in Kinvest, the idea of ownership is the power. So if it's North American investors investing in the company, there's an imbalance to start. But the journey of a Kinvest company is those North American investors have to give up ownership after a set period of time to the employees of the company, right? And so the journey that you're on is one from foreign ownership to local ownership. And there is a benefit to the foreign owners for a while. They get some yield from the company. But the true value that's being created in the company is the long-term value of the company, and it becomes owned in an employee trust. So all the equity in the company moves to the employees. When I talked with Bruno about this, he said, and you know what would be really cool? Is if 10 years later, those local owners had to pass it on to a next generation of local owners. I went, wow, that's a bridge too far right now. But the idea that we can actually not give, but build value together, and the transfer of that value is mutual. We're both benefiting together. I think that's one way. I think there's other kinds of mutuality, not just with each other, but can you speak to mutuality with the environment? Because we live in a place where we are symbiotic with what's around us, and is there a space where we have to think about that as well in the context of mutuality? And again, I caught you with that one off guard.
You did.
But I know you're quick enough to get there.
I mean, yes, I mean, we see it now, right? Like global warming. What are we doing? Because we are using more than our world can give us. But ADHD brain, going back to what you were saying about the economics of it and different ways of it with mutuality. Man, sorry, my brain just I lost my train of thought because you caught me off guard with
the environment one.
With the environment.
Yeah. But I think we often only think about capital as money.
That's, yes, productivity. I was going to say, like, I think sometimes when we think of mutuality, sometimes we're always thinking that we need to be giving, like how, and not just being. And we struggle when people say, okay, but if I come to Mexico, what am I going to do? Instead of, it really is a relationship. And in that, just visiting, sometimes it's just getting to know without coming with an agenda.
Yeah, for sure.
Right?
Even this relationship.
Yes.
I met you 4 or 5 days ago for the first time.
That's true. Yeah.
And we've had this conversation sort of ongoing in our house, in the car, and all those kinds of things.
Yep.
It's a being present. And in North American culture, we have such a need to do something, right? It's almost built into who we are. In fact, the seasons often dictate a kind of pressure around this.
Yes.
Right? We live in a cold, hot, we go between these seasons. By the time summer ends, we have to. And so how do you help us live in a space where we can step back from what has defined us culturally and be present with a different space and a different understanding of the world?
So for me, I don't know if I can help you, because then that's saying that I have something to give you.
Language
that
is
you don't
so
have,
important. There we go. Well done.
Right? But as we sit with this term of mutuality, I think we always have to reflect on what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we are talking about what we are doing. It's this constant reassess and constant acknowledgement of falling back into our old pattern of charity, because we all do it. I still do it. Constantly catch myself.
So I want you to react to a statement. I think charity is very transactional, and mutuality is very relational. And what is the if you agree with that, what is the consequence of that statement?
The consequence of mutuality, of relationship?
Yeah, as opposed to being transactional.
As opposed to being transactional. Then if it's relational, it's doing together, right?
It's not easy.
It's not easy. It's messy.
Yeah.
It's community.
Yeah.
And it's not, it's hard. It's not always fun or enjoyable, and it definitely doesn't make us feel good.
So I think we're so encultured towards the idea of the transaction, right? Should I buy fair trade coffee? Of course you should buy fair trade coffee, right? But it's a transaction. We're almost purchasing our redemption at the till, right? As opposed to going and living in a reciprocal relationship with somebody and getting to know who they are. We always will have an element of transaction that takes place, but it's how we manage that transaction that I think is important. Can we open it up?
Yeah.
Please. We have an expression in Africa. We say something's worth 10 cents a pound. And what we mean by that is the good work that charity often comes and does is install things that aren't needed or wanted, or even any asset valuation is done. And we can sell it. We can sell the steel for 10 cents a pound. And the people will say that, well, that's really interesting. We can get 10 cents a pound for that. And it's a critique of the lack of listening that goes on and the lack of mutuality and sort of the transactionality of things. Other thoughts, questions? Ask questions. So I'll give two examples. Um, in a previous lifetime, as I like to say, I was part of a project that built a social housing in downtown Vancouver. There's an interesting church on First Avenue. I think it used to be called First Baptist, and then it changed to Grandview Baptist. And they owned a parking lot across the street. Very, very valuable piece of land. Somewhere around 2010 or so. And they, by the way, they live right adjacent to the downtown east side. And they said, we should sell this parking lot. This is Vancouver. The land is worth millions of dollars. And a member of their church was the leader of something called I can't remember the name of it now, Salisbury Housing Society. And they had commissioned a study of people that lived in the downtown east side who were homeless. And they asked the question, what is the number one thing you need if you're homeless? And by the way, we keep a count in Vancouver. We have roughly 2,000 people who live on the downtown east side who are legitimately homeless. You know what the number one thing they all say that they need? Companionship. They're all lonely. And out of that question formed a really unique project called Cohere. And Cohere is a building with 26 units in it for people on the downtown east side, divided into, I think, 4 pods. And 1-year rotations, a family from the church, 4 families from the church, live with each one of those groups of 4 or 5 people in a communal setting. And they cook with them, they eat with them, they live with 4 or 5 people who previously were homeless. It's called Cohere. Cohere, literally C-O, colon, thank you, here. And I worked on the capital campaign for that project. And then one of my former students messaged me and said, Mr. Sawatsky, I saw your name on a brochure, and I live here now. Scott Neufeld.
I'm not at all surprised that
Yeah. Yeah.
the experience that
Yeah.
you're every
Yeah.
with a lot of the people, the greater percentage of people that come
Mhm.
are not needed.
They're lonely.
Would it make their finances go smoother?
Yeah.
Here?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because
Community.
Community. Yeah. Yeah.
and they don't have that. They used to have that.
Mhm.
Where they came in as though they were coming to shop, which they are, and we had to take a step back, 100%.
Mm.
And they don't get that. They get a meal, and we talk to them, and we phone them where they are, what happened, what
Mhm.
and but we find them. We're not asking them to do it.
Mhm.
We are a little more vocal about us.
Mhm.
I don't.
Mhm.
But we don't
Mhm.
either need the chairs up that
Mhm.
they can talk and talk.
Yeah. Asking questions is so much the starting point of this. I know you've
Yeah.
have some thoughts on this as well. So
No, I agree. So
Yep.
if community is what's needed and the way, like maybe a transition plan to turn it into a community gathering, what is the need that they have? Because if we're just giving them a meal to go home, and I'm not saying that it's wrong, but sit and question and come up together with what the community needs.
there's always going to be risk. So to the point about mutuality. Well, and if you are, yeah. So Deborah and I get to stand outside of this and go,
Yeah.
not our church, not our problem. But at the same time, we get to say, okay, but there's this idea of always going to be shared risk, right? So when they built Cohere, it was very much shared risk. When we started Kinvest, we thought what we were going to do was create different projects in villages that would community development. But we hired a consultant who does human-centered design questioning. There's a term for this. I think I'm getting it wrong. And it's a way of asking the question multiple times because most people won't tell you the truth the first time you ask them something, right? We all ask how you're doing, and everybody says fine, right? Until you ask the follow-up 2 or 3 times till you get a real answer. Human-centered design testing or questioning sort of pushes in, and we interviewed 57 people in rural Rwanda. They all came back with the same thing that they desired or they needed in life, and they said, basically, we need to own land. And when you ask, why do you need to own land? The answer is not to make money and get rich. The answer is a financial security question. If my daughter gets sick and I own land, I can sell the piece of land and I can take her to a hospital, right? I want to own a piece of land because I want to leave something for my children. What they're describing to us is to say, we need to own an asset, a financial asset that creates security for us. And we went, oh crap, well that wasn't our plan. Okay, how do we respond to that now? Because we asked the questions. And so the idea behind creating a company that the employees will own is the idea of giving the idea of financial security, designing something where financial security is the outcome. It always starts with asking questions, and asking questions is always dangerous. It's always dangerous. And the beauty of our world and the messiness of our world is actually being able to work on the answers to the questions. And that's part of the joy in our work that we get to do every day.
Yep.
Because it gets messy.
But I would wonder if some
them
I
into
would
the
wonder,
conversation. Yeah.
I'm not a part of it, but I can imagine there would be, if there was joint conversation, there may be so much, but it's as we're actually challenged. It is, yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Since this is a podcast and it's going to be broadcast within a 2-hour time limit,
Gonna wrap it up.
I want to invite you to give a kind of final statement around the idea of mutuality and what it means to you and what you want to convey before we say goodbye tonight.
Well, again, the same. For me, it really is about constantly asking questions and reassessing. Okay, this is what we've done, and sometimes it works until it doesn't. But if that constant reassessing, if it's not working, why is it not working? And is it still needed? And the last one, for at least for me, is if I'm not here, who's doing it? And if I'm not here and who's doing it, and that means no one, then I have a big problem, right?
It's dependent on you.
Yes.
Yeah. That's good. I want to close. Wow, dyslexia come through right there. I want to close with a quote. Wow. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, French philosopher, raised religious, studied to be a priest at one point. He has this beautiful saying, and I think this is the capture of mutuality in lots of ways. He says, our duty as men and women is to proceed as if limits to our ability do not exist because we are collaborators in creation. This entire project, the project of life itself, is to collaborate in creation. We're not end users. We are collaborators in what is being created. And what I appreciate about your work every day is I think you're creating beauty every day in what you do, and that's incredible.
Well, first of all, I just want to say a big thank you to Deborah and for Ray for the very thought-provoking and also soul-searching conversations, right? I hope that we are all leaving this space tonight with not just carrying more questions for ourselves, but also be more open to ask questions. Yeah. What I really appreciate from Deborah are your few words. When you say that it is messy to enter into this mutuality space, right? The mutual relationship is messy. It doesn't make us feel good all the time. So when you are feeling that you get caught in this huge web of messiness, when you are not feeling self-gratifying, you are actually on the right path rather than not. And to flip it around, if you are self-gratifying because of what you are able to offer, that may be a red flag.
That's good.
I think we've been privileges is one thing. In our prep talk, you actually quote something, quote someone who says about entering into this space, especially as people from the West. We have so many privilege we may not even be fully aware of. We are blind to our privileges, right? So when we enter into a relationship that begins with such huge power imbalances, right? There is a lot of letting go, trusting. That's why spiritual practices, when we engage them, it continue to retrain our hearts and our spirit to enter into this space, right? So we offer you the tools of the welcome prayer that you can start using regularly. And I want to actually close with a lectio. I think, back to scriptures, right? I think Jesus actually has offered a model for us to engage into this work from a place of mutualities, right? The story in Luke chapter 10, which for those of us who are using the Revised Common Lectionaries, we get to read it this year, is about Jesus sending the 70 into the communities, right? His disciples, after following him for a while, they're all excited, and now their teacher is sending them into the communities to do what they think is wonderful work, right? But these were the instruction Jesus given to them. So being a lectio, I would read it once, and I would invite you to really deeply listen. What words or phrases caught your attention, and just pause and spend some time deep in these words. And then when I read it again, this is an opportunity for you to have a conversations with God. What is God inviting us to be different, to engage in these words differently? So let us just sit comfortably, center our thoughts and mind. Jesus says to his disciples, "Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace to this house.' And if a person of peace is there, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide. Do not move from house to house." Carry no purse, no bag, no sandals, and greet no one on the road. Whatever house you enter, first say, 'Peace to this house.' And if a person of peace is there, your peace will rest on that person. But if not, it will return to you. Remain in the same house, eating and drinking whatever they provide. Do not move about from house to house. like to share what you have received from your conversations with God listening to this passage. Thank you. Yeah. It seems like the first and foremost instructions to the followers was to learn and receive from stranger almost as a prerequisite of the encounter, right? To strip themselves of any privilege, no purse, no sandals. You need to rely, actually, you are at the mercy of the people you are supposed to serve. And when you live with them, just imagine the kind of conversations you may have rather than when you have something to provide them. It always fascinates me how Christian charity has devolved or strayed away from our Lord's instructions into that whole scheme of power trips to make us feel good. So I think we'll leave the evening as such. Just want to say a big thank you to our guests and to each one of you who really enliven these conversations. But more importantly, you now have heard the words. May you carry this word to start changing the culture where we lived, where you serve and where you lived. And I think that would be the biggest gift that we're able to receive from Deborah and from Ray tonight, and also from the people that has changed you, transformed you, and has taught you. Blessings to you all. There's a basket outside. Your donations are appreciated, but this is not necessary. And we do want to also support the work of the Eternal Anchor as well. So whatever you can give, it would be appreciated.
Which one is the lie? Wow.
Someone who's been paying attention.
So, in a kind of way, they're all true. So I have touched the Queen of England when she was alive. It always is awkward, actually. Very unique thing to have happened. But actually, truthfully, she should fly because you're not allowed to reach out to her. Story for later. I have talked to Barack Obama on the phone. I was recruited to play basketball at SFU by Jay Triano when I was a high school student. Now, the trick on that's the lie.